The wave principle is a great form of technical analysis based off crowd psychology. The idea is simple. Financial markets are fractaled and move in recognizable patterns. Applying the wave principle, however, can be a little trickier. I'm Alexandra Lienhard for Elliott Wave TV, joined today by recognized expert in Elliott Wave analysis and trading, Elliott Wave International's own Jeffrey Kennedy. Jeff, now I'd like to start off today with a simple overview for those who are newer to the wave principle. What exactly is the wave principle, and in your opinion, why is it such a reliable and powerful way to forecast financial markets?
Hello, Alex. Well, the wave principle is nothing more than a form of technical analysis which is based on crowd psychology and pattern recognition. And I know some people think that the wave principle is complicated, and unfortunately, it actually can be complicated. As far as the rules and guidelines which actually govern pattern development, we have close to about 100 different rules and guidelines that do that. But what people need to understand is it doesn't have to be complicated, because really, if you look at the core foundation of what the Elliott Wave principle is, it's really based on five very specific patterns: the impulse wave, the ending diagonal, the zigzag, the flat, and the triangle. Everything else we know about the wave principle essentially stems from those five core patterns. The analogy I like to utilize quite frequently is that of a car. I do not know how to change out the transmission in my car. It's simply too complex for me. But I still have the basic essential skill set to be able to drive the car quite proficiently. So I really encourage a lot of people who are not familiar with the wave principle, just if you understand the basics, practice with the basics just a little bit, you'll be surprised at how much it can impact your analysis as well as your overall trading results.
And as you mentioned, there are hundreds of rules and guidelines. What are some of the best ways to get your mind around these various rules and guidelines, besides the obvious, of course, of subscribing to your service? I mean, I'd imagine it takes quite a lot of time and discipline.
Well, it does take time and practice, and probably the first thing I would recommend, of course, would be to subscribe to Trader's Classroom. I really enjoy that product because it's really educationally based, where I teach people actually not only the wave principle, but other forms of technical analysis, really with it toward a trading application. Now, also too, as far as learning the wave principle, I kind of always have to remind people the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And a lot of times with the wave principle, whenever they open the book and they start looking at all the rules and the guidelines, they really become overwhelmed. Start simple. Start with the basics. Again, as I mentioned previously, there are five core Elliott wave patterns we work with: the impulse wave, the ending diagonal, the zigzag, the flat, and the triangle. So focus initially on the impulse wave. Learn the rules, learn the guidelines, and then once you master the impulse wave, move on to another pattern. But really, it's just the visual application of what you're learning that's what's ultimately most important, because after a while, with a little bit of practice, just like your piano teacher said when you were a kid, practice, practice, practice. The same thing is equally applicable to the Elliott wave principle. It takes some time, but it's quite doable. And really, it's not as complicated as many people might think.
And digging a little deeper into your service, Trader's Classroom, where you use the rules and guidelines of the wave principle to forecast future price action. Take me through your approach and how you go about actually applying the wave principle to a given price chart.
Well, the first thing I do whenever I pull up a price chart, many times I look at individual equities, but if I'll pull up a price chart of equities or a currency or maybe a commodity market, the first thing I do is look for a pattern I recognize. And that's a great place to start. I'll look at a price chart and I'll look for one of the five core patterns. Again, ideally, I'll initially see something very quickly. I'll be able to identify an initial pattern, say an impulsive structure. Well, that's basically my first step. Because if I can clearly identify an impulsive structure on a price chart, and if we're toward the say maturity of that impulsive structure, well, I can apply the rules and guidelines of the weight principle to make a high probability or high confidence forecast on what to expect next. For example, let's pretend that we're looking at a price chart cold, and we clearly see a five-wave advance. Waves 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. They're already in place. Well, what can we look for? Well, if we apply the Elliott wave guideline regarding the depth of corrective waves, we know that whenever a five-wave move is complete, a retracement occurs. It pushes prices back into the span of travel of the prior fourth wave, most often ending near its terminus. So now I can make a high confidence forecast to look for a counter trend move, a correction. That correction will unfold either as a zigzag, a flat, or a triangle, or possibly a variation thereof. But more importantly, because that's a counter trend price move, that ultimately will give me a bottom to actually trade against for further advance in the direction of the original impulse wave, because the magic of a motive wave or an impulse wave is that it identifies the direction of the larger trend. This is how we make our Elliott wave forecast. Again, for example, a zigzag, that's a counter trend price move. Once it's complete, we can expect it to be more than fully retraced in the near future.
Elliott Wave International's free Trader Education Week is happening now. If you enjoyed this interview with Jeffrey Kennedy, be sure to check it out. Trader Education Week is a free event to help traders learn to find high-confidence trade setups for themselves. During the week-long event, you'll be invited to attend a live online webinar with Jeffrey and get a sampling of his Trader's Classroom lessons that will help you improve your trading confidence. Learn more and register at the link below.